Welcome to the Deep Talks podcast. My name is Regulus. Today, my co-host is Janet, and we're interviewing Bartimaeus Black about his occult ritual practice and system. He has written several books on the topic, and he's well versed in these subjects. So I thank him for joining us today. And would you like to tell us maybe about how you started this pursuit? Like what happened in your life that really brought your culmination of, motivation and wisdom together to make this happen?
Well, basically, I've always been interested in magic and esotericism in one way or another. Since I was a kid, I've just been like totally obsessed with it. I remember when I was like 5 or something, there was a book that they had at the library in Tacoma where I grew up that was just like on wizardry, some like little old, I can't remember who put it out exactly, but they talked about like different traditions of magic and witchcraft and stuff, talking about making salt circles and just general wizard lore. And that's aside from the fact that I'm from the Harry Potter generation, my parents read that to me when I was a kid. So it's like I had exposure to like the fantasy magic. And once I found out that there was some form of actual magic, I started reading about it obsessively from when I was like, I think 12 or something. There's a book that Llewellyn put out that was specifically oriented towards the youth. Can't remember the name of it now, but it's this like purple book written by a guy who went by Cornelius Rumstuckle. Eventually, I came to find out that a lot of the stuff in there was just for like foundational ceremonial magical training. He taught how to make all the elemental tools and some basic meditation practices, visualization, all that stuff. Over time, I discovered the grimoire tradition, the medieval Western magical tradition, and I was very taken up with that. Also, I got Secrets of the Magical Grimoires by Aaron Leach was the first book that I bought on it, and I was like, 14 or something, I think. And yeah, I was just totally taken up with the medieval and Renaissance era systems of magic, like from the Keys of Solomon, and particularly the Grimoire of Abermelin really stuck out to me. And that was like a lifelong obsession of mine until I did a variation on that some time ago, several years ago now.
Well, it sounds like you're well versed in
what specific. What specific info do you want? Like, like about my views about just curious. So I can have like a bit of guidance to go on, because I could just ramble on, but I'd like to have a little more structure than.
I was mostly interested in what, like, if any specific occurrence or like what has happened in your life that gave you the confirmation that your beliefs are correct in the sense that they work for you. Like, what has confirmed your magical practice as functional for you?
Wow, that is a really good question. That's actually one of the few that I have not seen asked in many places in other interviews. This is actually really cool. Well, I would say having a happy, successful relationship for the past 7 years that I conjured up, from a fairly young age. That's worked. That's been one of the great proofs that I've had that it works. In terms of external result, internally, I would say the sort of alchemical transmutation of, I used to be an incredibly, what's the term that I want? Like, I used to have a severe lack of confidence and all this sort of stuff when I was younger. I wasn't so sure of myself. I was always second guessing everything that I was doing. But through magical practice, I've managed to overcome all those issues, all the lack of self-esteem, bit of self-loathing, all that sort of stuff, to actually be like a real person.
You would
go
say
do
that
stuff and feel confident in my own.
Would you say that practicing Would you say that practicing magic has taught you self-love in a way?
That would be a way to put it. Yeah, but it's more than just that. It's sort of like recognizing that I have my own talents and all these other sorts of things I can contribute to the world. That I am somewhat of an expert in my field, that sort of thing, and kind of taking the initiative to actually do that and project my word, like as Crowley would refer to it, like the whole idea of the word of the aeon, all these sorts of things. And this is what he says you should do actually after you work through the AA system and get to know your HGA, your holy guardian angel, that you're supposed to figure out your word and then project it into the world, that your like system of thought and philosophy, and then put that out there. And that's kind of the point that I'm working on now.
I have a question.
I wouldn't have gotten to if it wasn't for the magical work. Yeah, sure.
So you said you've conjured something up. Now, is that an egregore, or is that like an external deity that you've kind of manifested into your life and that helps you? Can you elaborate a little bit on what that meant?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had conjured my relationship with my wife. That's like one of the biggest things. I think that's the most obvious in a very material way. But on the whole, my magical practice doesn't revolve around egregores and all that sort of stuff. It's very much a spirit-based system where it's like, working with, say, one of my favorite grimoires to work with is the Arbitel of Magic, where you have the 7 Olympic spirits that correspond to each of the planets. I worked with Rufus Opus's 7 Spheres years ago, which was a big part of my magical development early on. And that, that's working with the 7 planetary archangels. So...
And out of those, yeah. Who do you conjure the most? Because I also practice Olympian chaos magic, so I'm so glad you touched on that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I mostly work with the most. That's like the main one.
Very nice.
Solar Spirit there is one of my favorites. Yeah, the familiar I got from him was very helpful. I haven't really had too much use for that lately. Most of the time, I just go to my angel, or I do prayers and stuff and see what happens. I've been practicing Enochian for a bit too, which has been interesting. I can't really talk too much about the work in that. There's a lot of it that's kind of private, but the results have been interesting to see happen. I will say that.
Very cool.
Well, your experiences have led you to become quite systemized, and you're able to recognize patterns through your experiences. So how would you say that ability that you've gained through this practice has helped you write about these things? Like, what exactly do you think gave you the ability to systemize your practice in a way you could help others learn it?
Well, doing the work in the first place, just reading about this stuff doesn't really put you in a position to be able to do it, or to be able to share that with others, which is kind of something that I've seen in a lot of magical circles, where you have people who will just like read a book or two, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to like write about this, and then put something out there. And it's like, well, no, you actually have to kind of practice it a little bit. In terms of the systematization, I would say that comes mostly from just, it's part of how my mind works. I have, if you're looking at my astrological chart, I have both my moon and Mercury in Virgo. So it leads to an interesting way to approaching spirituality. That's very much like there are rules, there are protocols. You follow the protocol, you get the thing, and that's just kind of how it works for me, mentally speaking. But having it systematized also makes it easier to express it to other people. It's like I'll tell people I do readings for clients and stuff, locally up here in Bellingham, and it's like, I tell people all the time, it's like, it's like if the Hierophant comes up, which tarot is my big thing. I use tarot for personal divination and for clients and all sorts of stuff. But, and I talk about this in the book I wrote on tarot also, the Hierophant is like the expressed aspect of esoteric spirituality, so the Hierophant represents religion, but, we have to understand what religion is. Religion is that lived expression of spiritual esoteric truth, particularly as expressed in a way that that other people will be able to actually understand it in a way that can be given over to others. So I have this perspective where magic has to be systematized to some degree. Like, we may not understand exactly how it all works, but how to do it has to at least be written down and presented in a way that people will be able to actually do it, rather than, left too vague. That's my only complaint about modern chaos magic, by the way, is there's too much vagary. But if you read like Peter Carroll, for example, it's like all Peter Carroll really did was just continue Crowley's work of breaking down the essential protocols and presenting them without dogma. And Peter Carroll is more successful at that than Crowley, as far as I'm concerned, because Crowley got all caught up in his thelema stuff, and Carroll is just like, oh yeah, you have your ecstatic trance, and what's the other one? The active and passive trance. You have you're getting to trance through drugs and sex and stuff, and then you have your fasting and mortification trance. So,
that's the thing. The type of chaos magic that myself and my cohorts buy into, if you want to say that, is very systemized and ritualized. And the more people that believe in something, the more powerful it is. And that kind of brings me to in what you said a second ago, kind of brought me to something else that I wanted to ask about. Like, what role does emotion play in your practice?
Well, as Agrippa says in the 3 books of occult philosophy, when you practice, for example, like angelic invocation, or you're trying to call down the aspects of celestial deity, you have to bring yourself to frenzy, which is, that excited state, a state where you can perceive extra things. And as I like to call it, I like to refer to it as God crazy. You excite yourself through prayer and invocation and the incense and, sprinklings of holy water. It all starts from the ritual bathing beforehand, really, that you start working yourself up into this state of essentially madness to be able to communicate with the spirits. So in that regard, emotion is it's crucial to the whole process. But, still when it comes to the planning it out and the actual accomplishing of the work, I still am very much like, you have to get yourself excited and emotional and stuff, but you still have to make sure that you follow the steps, that you follow the essential steps of ritual. You have to do the purification, the exorcism of the place, the cleansing of the area is another way of referring to that. You have to put together your circle if you're using a circle, or that depends on tradition. Some traditions don't really use circles after a certain point, but you set up the ritual space, and then you do the invocation or conjuration. If you're working with angels, then you would skip over the next phase of binding and exorcism, which would be specifically for lower spirits. They have your dismissal at the end, and then you wish them well and blessings and all that stuff while you send them off to do the thing that you asked them to do. But you have to have that excitement as a part of it, even because if you just follow the steps without actually having any feeling, I don't think that you'll accomplish anything. Though Stephen Skinner disagrees with me on that. He maintains that so long as you just follow the steps, step by step, you don't believe in anything, you don't really, have all the experiences and stuff, you're still gonna have a spirit show up in front of you. But I'm not really sure that that's really how it would work. If you consider the frenzy thing that important, I don't really think it would work very well.
I think from my experience, when you're a blank slate, you try to flex your imagination. You try to force your visualization into reality, to project what you want to see. But I think that a lot of the time, if you allow yourself to realize the mundane is the spirit world in the past, in a sense, that seemingly mundane things can be the spirits that we manifested. And being able to recognize
absolutely
are very important. And that's, I think, something a lot of people skip over or don't understand when they're starting off.
Oh yeah, for sure. It says that in the end of the Arbitel, the last set of aphorisms, I think it is. Yeah, I think it's the 7th septenary. It says that the magician has to cultivate the sense that everything is directed by the spirits. Everything that he interacts with, everybody he talks to, everything going on around him is entirely influenced by the spirits, entirely guided by spiritual forces and stuff. So yeah, that's a big part of it that a lot of people miss. And in traditionalist grimoire circles, at least, a lot of people miss out on the fact that your mind and the direction of your spirit actually do have an influence on life around you. This is one of the few failings of the spirit model that I've seen, at least in practical application in the modern era, is that a lot of people get kind of caught up on oh yeah, sure, there's a spirit column up at the time of working and all this stuff, but they ignore their own personal power, which Agrippa also talks about. Robert Anton Wilson puts it into his modern context, with all the exercises he has in Prometheus Rising, that, it's like, oh yeah, the way your mind is oriented, either you're noticing things more often that are like in accordance with your thing. Like if you're trying to, I can't remember the thing he says, like, look, like you should try to focus on seeing like some sort of car or something. And it's like, oh, of course you're going to see more of that car because your attention is directed towards that. Or are you conjuring more of them into existence? The Agrippa perspective is that you would effectively, by the power of your passions and your soul and all that stuff, you could bring things into existence that weren't there before.
Yeah.
Even without directly interfacing with spirits.
Right. I personally believe that like everyone is all about their angel numbers. There's like sending them, posting them on the internet. It's like, look, 1111, 111. It's like, well, that happens twice a day. You know what I mean? If you use like 12-hour standard time. And then the people with the license plates, the same thing. It's just like, look, it's a combination of numbers. It's only because you're looking for it. And that's the reason why you're seeing it. I mean, you're not manifesting new license plate numbers. You're just noticing them because you've trained your mind to do so.
But if you follow the system of training like Crowley advocates for, then you can derive messages from that. There's an oath for the stage I first chose, the Babe of the Abyss, where everything that happens to you is to be viewed as an individual dealing of God with your soul, is how he puts it. And like, you can find really interesting sort of things that way. You have to be careful not to let that just devolve into schizophrenia, though. That's the hard part.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't go full schizo with it.
Everybody's seeing the number 23 everywhere. It's like, okay, look, it's a pretty common number. But yes, I do believe like when you're training your mind, you're also kind of walking down a path. You know what I mean? And that is whether or not you're manifesting it, whether or not you're noticing it, whether or not you're seeing it, and things are coincidentally happening to you. And I believe it was Jung that said famously, like, coincidence is kind of like an initiation. You know what I mean? Like once you start to see coincidences, you very well could be being initiated.
Bartimaeus.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sorry to interrupt there, guys. You were going well. Your conversation was going well. I wanted to say, you seem to have been influenced quite heavily by Abrahamic influenced authors. Do you believe that all is one thing? Like there is no separation and everything is connected fundamentally at the root?
So that is an interesting question. I take a very Gnostic perspective to things, and I would like to differentiate between, say, like Gnosticism and early Christianity and the Abrahamic religions of Protestantism, Judaism, and Islam. Because Christianity at its core really is Christianity up until, really fairly recently, historically speaking, is more of an extension of the Greek mystery cults than an Abrahamic religion, So I find there's some references to referring to some people as, oh, lo, you're a child of Abraham. But in the cultural context that the Gospels were written in, it was really referring to somebody as being like a charitable person. Because if you read through the epistles of St. Paul and as well as much of the gospel, it's the emphasis is less on the old covenant. Christ explicitly teaches that there's a new covenant in his blood rather than the old covenant of Jehovah and all that. So
they created a new eschatology.
So I would say that really
with Christianity.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
So
which is also just it was an elevation of the Greek mysteries at the same time. They're refined and perfected through the ages, and they were brought to their pinnacle through Christianity. So when talking about these older authors, most of them come from the pre-Reformation sort of theological background, where they're more or less just straight up Christian. They're Catholic. That was the background they were writing from. So they had this great appreciation for mystery and sanctity that you don't really have in the Abrahamic religions that you don't really have, except for in a very earthly way. Animal sacrifice and stuff is the ideal expression of Judaism, for example. Whereas that's not a thing for Christianity. We have the mass for that. But to say that all things are one is a bit of an oversimplification, I think. That's like if you were to to make a stew or something. Yeah, I'm not really good at metaphors, but or analogies and stuff. But going to try to go for one here. It's like if you're to make a stew, and it's like you have your individual ingredients. You have your onions, your garlic, potatoes, your beef or whatever. Maybe put a dollop of sour cream in it afterwards. So each individual ingredient can be appreciated on its own in the context of the soup. But if you take an immersion blender and blend the whole thing up, it's going to be nasty. To be honest, it's not really going to be very good. So it's like, you could have these varying spiritual traditions exist in the greater soup of the whole thing, but to try to say it's all the same just doesn't really work.
That's a really good
I've seen people try to
analogy.
say this about Kabbalah. Thank you. I've seen people try to say this about like Kabbalah and Gnosticism, trying to equate the two, and it's like, no, they're not the same. They're absolutely not the same thing at all. I don't want to get too into my views on Kabbalah, but
it's okay.
I studied it all in depth in Aramaic, but
Kabbalah is an organized system,
Yeah.
and Gnosticism is like just the belief in the anti-principle. So I hear you. I was going to
Gnosticism
say,
also has a very organized system as well. If you go into the earlier sources, like Valentinus, Valentinus, for example, had an entire system of theology that was practically accepted by the early Christians, which is very interesting. He was nearly the Pope. He nearly got elected the Bishop of Rome, and he wasn't really considered heretical until much later. And there are certain aspects of Gnostic thought, particularly Christian Gnostic thought, that you can isolate from everything else, right? That you can, where it's like it doesn't really. It's like a modern way of reading Gnosticism to try to say that it's like, oh, everything is basically the same. It's just the idea that you accept that this world is basically illusion, then everything, there's the real spiritual world or something. But it gets a lot further than that. There's very much the concept of the Savior that redeems us from the corruption of corporeality, as well as a lot of similar concepts like that. It's like recognizing that the world is fake to one degree or another. Like for example, the Sethians think that this world is real in the sense that it's evil and it sucks and we're stuck here. Then you have the other groups that basically were like, oh yeah, this world isn't, it's totally fake. It's not even real. Like, who cares?
there was one thing I wanted
And
to touch
the other
on.
things that kind of
We've
differentiate.
gotten
Yeah, sure.
on another tangent with Gnosticism. I wanted to ask you specifically on the detail of your views on all is one. For me, I wanted to just relate my own views and my own systemology here, or systemization for a minute.
Sure.
Here. So I'm more of a scientific-minded thinker. I'm a very rational-minded person. So I am fully in the field of seeing is believing. I didn't fully accept magic until I want to say the last few months, maybe a little like a year more so, because I finally have seen the culmination of my practice become realized, where I can speak and see what I speak about happen shortly afterwards. And that's just a straight up, no bullshit energy transfer from language into action. And what I've learned is that the basic fundamental root of reality is the same thing. The quarks, the unified field, however you want to put it, scientifically, we're at a point where we understand that it is what it is. And I think that being able to connect things together in a way that relates them and it benefits us in that regard is how we can unite our perspectives into something that creates the world into a better place, right? So my entire practice is surrounded around everything basically at the source being the same thing. We're all trying to reach the same place. We're all trying to have the same goals, or similar goals, however you want to break that egg, but at the end of the day, our specific individual paths are so different through genealogical evolution, through our own individual experiences, through epigenetic expressions, what our physical environment chose to express in our body. There's so many factors outside of our own personal control that determines who we are, that when we do apply our consciousness to ourselves, we can become anything we want to be from that slate. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying that this is my method that has worked for me, based off of the principle that everything is connected, and like basically the same thing with just different lenses of energy. How do I put this? If everything is constantly in motion and we're always perceiving the reality through our senses, then nothing is actually as it seems, because everything we see is after the fact of it happening. Like, we're only able to ever live in the
considering
past.
that's how our brains work.
Exactly. So everything is in my sense is just energy with a different like waveform or function that shows us what it is as senses.
Yeah, it's a very zoomed out view, in my opinion. I agree with you that all, magic comes from a source. Energy is that source, and what that source is the stuff of that is why religion is formed. Is to try and make sense of that, and to try and kind of channel and follow that path, find that light over and over and over. But yeah, and it's just like saying, everything is symbiotic. The planet itself, something that happens in the rainforest affects things in Antarctica, things like that. So I hear what you're saying. I do believe that that's a really zoomed out view, because once you get into the minutia and the inner workings of that energy, it's so complicated.
That is true, yes. But as above, so below, in the sense that, even though it seems kind of like simple to say all is one, it's also a very complex concept, because in order to break down things back to their fundamental particles and like actually understand mentally how the formation of matter is created from the ground up is just as complex as it is to break it down and see it for the minutia in the moment.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not anyways, Bartimaeus, I didn't want to detract from what you were saying there. I really appreciate you talking about Gnosticism. It's a very important concept, especially with the counter, the counter to Christianity, in the sense that Christianity views God and reality as a good thing that was given to us by the Creator. And Gnosticism takes that concept and flips it on its head and says, no, we didn't ask to be born. We are suffering, and our job is to alleviate our suffering and each other's suffering through practice, right? So,
yeah, so that's one side of it. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's anti-creator God is it's not anti-God. We have to make sure that that's very clear. Gnosticism is very much not anti-God. It's against the Lord of this world, which Jesus himself teaches is Satan. So It's in the Gospels right there. So, I mean, it's like to be against the world in that very real sense is just, well, it's what Jesus says explicitly. You're against Satan if you're against the world. So rather than being against God, which is a really weird way that people try to put that. I'm not sure as to who's trying to put it out that way in that exact context, but
well, I mean, God is.
I find that to be a bit
good and evil, the creator of good and evil, right? So,
there is that side of it. Yeah, I mean, that's Isaiah.
In a sense, the worship of the world is the worship of God, just in a very limited perspective, in a sense, right? Like every being serves their purpose in the whole.
I personally would have to disagree. I mean, you could take in a highly emanationist perspective, like if you take a pantheistic emanationist perspective, then yes, because if God is present in everything, then therefore, if you engage in worship of the world in some way, then you're worshiping God. But in the Christian and especially Gnostic perspective, it's like the celestial is real, whereas this is false. Like in the Platonic sense, right? The more real thing is the thing that's closest to the source, and then this is not quite as real. I mean, it's more false than real is the essential idea, which shouldn't be taken too far. It's like you should enjoy your life while you're in this world. I think that's just my personal perspective. I think we should try to be healthy and try to handle our lives and do all that stuff and enjoy it. But
I think these people
at the same time, engaging in earth worship is a bit,
I think these people were also living very nature-based lives. They didn't have very much like human-made things around them. It was very living off the land, doing whatever they can with each other to get by. Nowadays, we live surrounded by objects that are made by men, like just complex things that we personally can't even imagine creating, that come from great works of collaboration. And I think that being able to see that physically in front of us shows us the world is real in a way that we can't like deny, because we had to have created these things out of something, right? I think just building off of that concept.
I think what you're saying, or what Bartimaeus is saying, is like the trappings of this world are not very important to your spiritual development, to your it's kind of like the holographic universe thing. It's like this stuff is, it's not that important for your spirituality. What is important for your spirituality and your practice is what is somewhat intangible by a lot of accounts. It's like if you believe in the other world, you'll start, like, this world will start to lose its importance and kind of lose its lust, and that's the whole point of religion. It's just kind of like believing in something else and that having faith that the world is a better place once we're off of this planet.
I see.
I wouldn't necessarily go that far with it, where it's this world will be a better place. The essential from the Gnostic perspective, I know originally we're supposed to talk about magic and stuff, but here we go on the Gnostic tangent. There's just things that I think about all the time. It's like it's like the whole thing is to be able to divorce oneself from the world in that sense. Like, you have to be like Jesus teaches in the Gospels. You have to be in the world, but not of the world, right? There's also all the, he also teaches the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, depending on which gospel you're going off of, is within, right? So the essential Gnostic perspective, again, as far as I understand, plenty of other Gnostics would disagree with me, including those in my own church system, is basically to attain, well, I don't think they disagree with me on this point at least, but it's to attain that higher awareness and to live in the kingdom of heaven, in the sense that you can, the divinity that is in the world, you live according to that, rather than according to the negative, what someone referred to as the satanic parts of the world, the stuff that draws you in and keeps you away from God, fear, anxiety, what in the Gnostics refer to as the archonic powers, or as the exoteric Christians would refer to just plain old as demons,
Yep.
or as Satan. It's these aspects of fear and paranoia and anxiety, all the things that keep us down and unable to think about real things, things that are transcendent, things that are beautiful in the true sense,
That brings me on to a major point that I have is if we immanentize our eschatology and think about the world as if it doesn't end, right? If we create a new system of our organized religious belief that doesn't worship the end of the world as the baseline of what is we're heading towards, and it instead creates a utopic vision through their eschatology. And do you think that would be able to help us be able to overcome this satanic being that we've created as an egregor for ourselves? We'd be able to become better humans through the belief that the world's not ending, it won't ever end, there will always be enough. And us continuing to thrive is what's creating that process happening, whether people want it to happen or not. That's a byproduct of our existence. Do you think that a belief system that reinforces that would be greater served for its purpose of what religion is supposed to do than the way it is now?
So I would say that I would first mention that most of the ideas of this idea of a complete end of the world, the way that it's been hyper emphasized, is very much another modern thing that only started in the past 150 years. Even strict millenarian, the whole millennialist concept. If you go back to the church fathers, plenty of them didn't believe that Christ was going to come back physically and reign over the world for 1,000 years. And everybody would die and all this stuff. The essential purpose of of religion, at least again in my understanding of Christianity, is that it is essentially to carry on the mysteries, which, and the mysteries again from the Greco-Egypto-Roman religious cults, were meant to bring us to a different level of consciousness, to become conscious rather than unconscious, and to be able to actually apprehend things that are numinous, and to be able to receive new forms of knowledge not just of ourselves, but of the celestial realms. In the Gnostic system of cosmology, maybe it's not really cosmology, maybe it's technically, it's Gnostic anthropology, we'd say. You have the three classes of people. You have the Hiletics, you have psychics, and pneumatics. That's just kind of part of the basic framework of Gnostic thought. I'm not really certain that everybody would be able to get it in the same way. I think that there are always people who will really get it, and there are people who will kind of get it. The people who really get it are the ones who know that the kingdom of God is a spiritual state that we have to strive for, to attain within ourselves through prayer and meditation, initiatory practices, which is, again, that's how the church was originally structured, was on initiatory practices that you went through to gain higher levels of this understanding of this Christ consciousness understanding, to use the modern lingo. The people who really get it are the ones who can attain that state and live that and try to impart that to others. Then you have the next group of people who like kind of get it, and they're the rank and file Christians of today, basically, who are like, okay, well, eventually Jesus is going to come back, and everything's going to be awesome, or the whole world's going to get set on fire, and then we're going to like live in heaven or something. It turns to doctrinal orthodoxy with that concept. That's arguably that's quite debatable, actually. Like, that whole idea is really very odd. It's only something that became present in the past 150 years of like, the rapture, right? We all have the rapture as a part of our culture, and it's like, that's not even a real biblical doctrine. It's something that they just made up in the past 150 years. And then you have the Hiletics, but the psychics, for example, would be like people who just, they go to church, they try to live upstanding lives, and whatever context that you're talking about, they try to live upstanding lives and be good people and help others and all that stuff. But you'll still always have like the lower Hiletic class, who are only concerned with, what they're eating, what's coming out of them, if they're going to have sex or not that evening. They're only thinking about that stuff. And that's all that they can ever focus on, is just like, oh yeah, well, what can I do today to engage in the physical delights of the world? And I'm not going to blame them for all the world's problems, but it is. I mean, it is part of our psychology. That we part of not part of psychology, but basic sociology, that we have those three strata.
This is a big part of the reason why I say we should initiate everyone all the time, whether they like it or not.
I want to speak to that if I can.
But can they get it? So that's the thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I want to speak to that.
We can at least enlighten them from the. Sorry to cut you off, Jan. I just wanted to say really quick on what you said. We can at least enlighten them from the Hiletic class to the next level up. Like, we can try.
We can try. That's the thing. We can try. We can try to give them the information and the resources to do it. But also, there are some people who just can't get it. No matter what you do, you could literally, like, if we had a way to like transmit friggin' mind waves or something into people's brains, if we had like a device that you could plug into the back of their head,
they don't have the receivers
that could receive, not Neuralink, God forbid, but something like that. It's just something, some sort of like satellite receptor or something that literally just channeled divine force into their heads. They would not get it.
Yeah,
they have a complete inability to understand it. So
I think that has to do with the pineal gland. It's like it's not opened up enough, or it's not evolved enough, and that, I don't know if that's biological, genetic, or whatever.